Well, MoMA, I think everyone knows what MoMA is, okay? And MoMA clearly, stands for being an inclusive and multi-departmental structure where there are a lot of different types of visual expressions and types of art, if you like, which um, which are totally interdependent between themselves. So taking this into consideration, can you explain to us how how the museum approaches design and architecture?
Yeah, sure. So as you mentioned, MoMA has a lot of different curatorial departments, a lot of which are sort of focused on medium. The Department of Architecture and Design actually was the first department ever devoted to architecture and design within a curatorial sort of like aspect in a museum. And it was very much the brainchild of MoMA's first director, Alfred Barr, as well as an architect named Philip Johnson. A lot of your audience might, of course, know him because of his architectural work, also because of his sort of involvement in politics, many different reasons. But basically, for both Barr and Philip Johnson, it was really important that design be seen as something that it was worthy of being in a museum, just as much as art, but also at the same time that people understood that everybody can have access to good design. So good design should be accessible to everybody. One of the very first design exhibitions that happened at the museum was called Machine Art. And that exhibition basically showcased machine-produced design pieces as if they were sculpture. And so the idea behind the show was to sort of like show how machine-produced objects were, they had achieved like such a high level sort of like aesthetic value that they were able to sort of like be shown just as a Picasso sculpture would be shown or anything else. But obviously at the same time, the show was looking at what at the time was seen as sort of like the highest level of good design, which meant sort of like, machine and the industrial revolution, right? So very much looking at technology, which is something that we do still, but at the time, of course, was a very specific notion of what technology and what sort of like technological innovation would mean for design. And so that has sort of like, that approach has sort of like stayed with us through the years. And by that approach, I mean sort of like looking at what is important for the time, what good design means for the time. And that, of course, changes depending on, of course, the curators that work in the department, of course, what's, the sort of like socioeconomic context. And so, for example, when we talk about innovation and technology, which is something that, as I mentioned, is really important for our department, it's really very much investigating how it is that, what are the sort of like specific needs of the time? How is it that technology can help us sort of like create a sort of like more inclusive environment through design? And so, the collection and the way in which we approach design very much varies a lot, keeping in mind sort of like this idea of the art of the time, which was something sort of like very grounding for MoMA. We look at everything from, humble masterpieces, which is, things that we like to call in a similar vein as sort of like the how we looked at machine art, are things that sort of like we live with on a day-to-day basis that are so sort of like so prominent and so sort of like just so present in our everyday environment that we don't really notice them, but at the same time are so well designed that they really make our life better. And so that can range, for example, from the Band-Aid to the post-it note to the paper clip. But then, of course, looking at things that are much more complex, from biodesign and sort of like different sort of like new materials, as I mentioned, to system design and sort of like architectural design. All of this through sort of like this lens of like what good design means and how it can help people.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.